In the 15th century, the town of Corbeil, France, was this quaint little town that was overshadowed by a very glorious and beautiful monastery, of which there were many monks, over a couple of hundred monks who dwelt in the monastery and prayed the divine office so beautifully that many of the townspeople, as part of the regular life of the town, they would go to the monastery to listen to the monks chant the divine office, would attend Mass at the monastery, and really the monks became the centerpiece of the town of Corbeil, and so many people were drawn to that town. Among them were the parents of Saint Colette of Corbeil. They were an older couple who wanted a child but could never have a child. The father, he was I believe wasn't a shoemaker, but he did work with his hands in a carpenter shop, I believe. But he could they never had children, always wanted a child. And the abbot of the monastery told them to pray to Saint Nicholas. The town had a great devotion to Saint Nicholas. And so this couple, probably in their 50s, made a novena to Saint Nicholas, and to their surprise, they conceived a child in their old age. We spoke about how in the Old Testament this happened only 3 times, but it happened a couple of times after that during the reign of grace, as it happened to this couple. And so they named their little girl Colette after Saint Nicholas. In French, I guess Nicholas is Nicolette, so the feminine version of that is Colette. So they named her Colette, this beautiful little child. And she was a very happy child and would, as she grew up, used to love to go up to the monastery with her parents to listen to the chanting of the monks and so forth. And she had great, great faith even as a small child. And one day in her father's shop, when she was playing, picking up tools she should not have been picking up, she dropped the axe and cut off her foot to the point where it was barely hanging on. And to which when her father came in tears, screaming, not knowing what to do, she told him not to worry. She blessed her own foot and it was completely healed. Now there were many stories of her in her life of miracles that took place. So as her parents were getting older and she was getting older, they were very worried because they were old in years, advanced in years, and here's their daughter in her teenage years who was very petite and very small. She was very short for her age. I don't think she reached over 4'5", or 4'6". Very small little girl. So her and her mother made a pilgrimage to a shrine in France. They walked the whole way. They get to the shrine and they're praying there, and all of a sudden Colette realized that her skirt was way too short. She had grown to a full-size mature girl while praying there at the shrine, and she came home embarrassed because her skirt was too short because of the great miracle God had worked for her. So it was obvious that this girl was destined for something beautiful and great in the world. Saint Colette began to give her life over to prayer, and she would go to the monastery, and her parents passed away, and the abbot of the monastery kind of became her guide, her spiritual guide, kind of a second father to her. And so Colette first joined the Poor Clare nuns. You know, the Poor Clares were founded by Saint Clare, the companion of Saint Francis in the 13th century. But she found them to be too weak. They weren't observant enough of the life the way Saint Clare was, and she wanted to live the life like Saint Clare did, so she left. So then she joined the Benedictine nuns, thinking certainly they must be faithful to the rule of Saint Benedict, and they too were not as observant as she thought they would be. So she left there. So she goes to live with a group of women, kind of living a single life with these women, trying to support each other in prayer, and then decides, you know what, I'm going to become an anchoress. So she has this whole big ceremony with the bishop, and they build onto the parish church a little room that has a window into the sanctuary so she can see the tabernacle and receive communion. And then she has a window where she can receive guests at a little window. But she's going to spend the rest of her life in that little room. It was called an anchoress. She was going to spend her life in seclusion, praising God in prayer. So this whole ceremony takes place, and they get her in there, and they close the door very ceremoniously, the door never to be opened again, and there she is, living a very happy life of prayer, becomes known as a great mystic. People are coming to the door all the time to receive advice from her as she grows in great maturity of life. And one day, during her time, St. Francis and St. Clare appear to St. Colette. And they tell St. Colette that her mission is to renew the Franciscan order. And she was taught the whole history of the Franciscan order from St. Francis and St. Clare. And then when she was told that now she was to begin the reform of the Franciscan order to bring it back to how St. Francis and St. Clare intended it to be, she said no. She was perfectly happy where she was, doing what she was doing, praying as she was praying. She was not going to get involved in trying to reform the entire Franciscan order, the men and the women branches of the order. Well, don't tell God no. It doesn't usually work out well for you, as Jonah found out when he wound up in the belly of a whale. St. Colette was struck blind for, I believe it was 3 days, and she couldn't find her way around her little house, whatever she was in. She was struck blind until finally she told the Lord, okay, yes, I'll do it, and then she could see. Now, when she finally told God, yes, she had this vision, she saw this priest, Father Henry de la Baume, who was really thirsting for the reform of the Franciscan order. And he was coming to see St. Colette, and then he's going to go to the Holy Land. So he knocks on the door, and St. Colette opens her window, and before the man could introduce himself, she said, Father Henry de la Baume, you're here to ask advice about whether or not you should reform the Franciscan order. You're not going to the Holy Land. Go to the Pope. Get me out of here. And so he did. She got permission to leave her anchor hold, got permission the Pope to reform the entire Franciscan order. And she would spend the rest of her life founding convents of nuns who lived the strict observance of St. Clare's life. She brought the Franciscans who were living a bit lazy in their life, she brought them to reform throughout France, throughout Belgium. I mean, incredible the impact that she had. She made friends with St. Joan of Arc. That's a whole other story, which would take me a whole other long homily. She became friends with St. Vincent Ferrer, who raised more people from the dead than any saint before or after him. Actually, they were such good friends that he gave her his staff that you see her holding in a little statue, if you can see it over there. And the other thing that kept happening is that whenever they would go to prayer with the sisters, this little lamb would come and sit at her feet. And that little lamb sat at her feet every single day for 3 decades, I believe it was, and the lamb never got older. The other day we talked about how St. Don Bosco had his guardian angel show up as a big black dog that would protect him. Well, more than likely, little Colette had her little sheep as really was her guardian angel who sat by her feet when she prayed. She was a very powerful, powerful saint. There's a very fun story when she went to go talk to the group of the Franciscan brothers, the friars, to tell them to reform and get back to the original rule of St. Francis. They basically blew her off, like, who are you to tell us how to live? She put her head down and she prayed, and then she looked up, and light came out of her face and knocked them off their chairs and knocked them out. When they came to, they realized they better listen to Colette. Now, during her whole reform movement, there was another great saint, Franciscan saint at the time, Saint Bernard of Siena, who was going around bringing about the reform of the Franciscan order in Italy and so forth. And he meets up with Colette. And he says to Colette, you have to join my reform. And Colette says, nope, no way, ain't having it. You're too weak. You're not living the life strong enough. And Bernardine of Siena had a little argument with her, and he said, well, you're going to have to live it no matter what. She says, well, we'll see about that. So St. Colette went with all the sisters for 3 days. They went around the entire convent on their knees praying that God would change the mind of St. Bernardine of Siena so that they wouldn't lose their observance of the life. Well, one day when St. Bernard was praying, our Lord Jesus Christ appeared to St. Bernardine of Siena and told him, leave Colette alone. So didn't mess with Colette, this powerful, beautiful saint who brought about the beautiful reform of the Franciscan order. And to this day, her monasteries are very faithful and are very close to the rule of St. Clare. Her reform movement endured to our present day and age. We have many of her reform convents here in the United States. And I'm happy that one of the girls from my youth group actually joined one of them. So I gave St. Colette a daughter, which is why I always have to talk about her, because I owe her so much, this beautiful, wonderful, powerful saint. Today we celebrate St. Colette, who you can tell in her life, although God was working in her life very powerfully, often discerned what was God's will, wasn't sure of what God's will was. When she finally figured out God's will, she didn't want to do it. And then the Lord gave her the grace to accomplish it. Each of us in our lives are chosen by God to do something beautiful, something great, something holy, created by God to make a powerful impact on this world. whether it's as a married couple, a single person, as a priest or religious. The key is to live our life faithfully in all things, to accept the will of God in our lives, to detach ourselves from our own will, to live as God has asked us to live, and to give ourselves completely to Him as one who is in love with Him, receiving Him as one who is in love with us, so that God can accomplish the wonderful things for which He has created us. We pray that St. Coletta Courbet this day will intercede for us, that you and I together during these very difficult times in the world, during these very difficult times in the church, days that are in great need of renewal both in the church and in the world, that we be given the grace to do what is ours to do for the glory of God, to the honor of Our Lady, and for the good of the Holy Church. May we be responsive to God's grace, accepting of God's grace. May we act with God's grace as men and women who know that God is in love with us, men and women who have fallen in love with God Himself. May God bless you, and Mary keep you.